My family loves Sienna. They'll never accept you. I can't choose you over them. He said it like he was reading a weather report. Not angry, not ashamed, just decided. And the wild part is, in that moment, I realized our relationship hadn't ended right then. It had been ending quietly for months. Every time his mother smiled at me like I was a guest who'd overstayed. Every time his father asked about my long-term prospects, like I was a questionable investment. Every time the woman they'd picked for him appeared again, and everyone acted like it was normal. But before we get into all of that, hey viewers, if you're into slow burn stories where betrayal doesn't scream, it whispers. Make sure you subscribe, hit like, and drop a comment if you've ever dealt with a family that thought love was something they could approve like a loan. Because this one wrecked me quietly. 2 years ago, my ex left me for the woman his family had always wanted. And now he's miserable, begging for another chance, while his parents call me like I'm customer support for the monster they insisted he become. I never thought I'd be the kind of person posting about my life like this, but here we are. Names changed for obvious reasons. Call me Naomi Carter. I was 26 when I met him. Let's call him Grant Harrington. And the woman his family treated like royalty? Sienna Hale. Grant and I met in college, in a literature class I took, because I needed an elective that didn't make me cry into my calculator. He sat 2 rows behind me, always looking like he belonged everywhere, like the world came with soft lighting when he walked into a room. I didn't know at first what old money actually looked like. I thought it was just nicer clothes, better manners, parents who didn't argue about bills. I didn't understand it was a language, a code, something you either grew up speaking or you never spoke at all. I came from working class stability. My dad fixed engines for a living. My mom was a public school teacher who graded papers at the kitchen table while our dinner cooled. We didn't have much, but we had warmth, we had honesty, we had the kind of love that didn't require permission. Grant came from the other universe, the kind with family estates outside the city. Trust funds whispered about like they were polite secrets. Generations of photos on the walls where every person looked rested. And yet, somehow, he didn't treat me like a visitor, at least not at first. He made me laugh. He listened when I talked. He'd walk with me after class, hands in his pockets, asking questions like he was genuinely curious about my life instead of politely entertained by it. We started studying together, then getting coffee, then cheap dates, food trucks, secondhand bookstores, hikes where we'd pretend the world was simple. And I fell hard. Not because he was rich, because he made me feel like my background wasn't a barrier, like I belonged beside him. I should have paid more attention to the first time his mother met me. It was a holiday dinner at their house, the first one. Not a house, really. A property. Long driveway, trees lining it like guards, lights glowing warm behind tall windows. The kind of place where you instinctively lower your voice like the air itself is expensive. Grant squeezed my hand as we walked in. "You'll be fine," he murmured. And I believed him, because back then, I still thought love could shield you. His mother, Mrs. Harrington, greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She complimented my dress the way you compliment a child's drawing. "Very sweet," she said, lingering on the word like it was a warning. During dinner, she asked me questions that sounded polite but landed sharp. Where did I grow up? What did my parents do? Did I like living in the city, or did I plan to upgrade someday? Then the jab came, small, casual, lethal. Grant mentioned my car having trouble earlier that week. I laughed, trying to keep it light. "It's old. It does that sometimes." Mrs. Harrington tilted her head. "Oh, Naomi," she said, voice soft. "How quaint that you still handle those things yourself. We don't even know where our mechanic lives. He just appears." Everyone chuckled. Grant, too. Not because it was funny, because in that world you laugh when the queen speaks. His father was worse. Mr. Harrington didn't do passive aggression. He did interrogation. He asked about my major, my career plan, what companies I was looking at, how quickly I expected to move up, whether I had leadership energy. He didn't ask like a curious person. He asked like I was interviewing for the right to exist near his son. And then there was Sienna. She wasn't introduced like a threat. She was introduced like a certainty. "Oh, and look who's here," Mrs. Harrington said, brightening for the first time all night. Sienna walked in like she'd been invited by gravity itself. Long, dark hair, perfect posture, the kind of smile that knew where it belonged. Grant stood to hug her, familiar, easy. No awkwardness. Like she was family. "This is Sienna," his mother said, beaming. "You remember her, Grant. Of course you do." Sienna's eyes flicked to me. Not rude, not hostile, just assessing. like she was looking at a chair someone had dragged into a room where it didn't match the set. Grant introduced me as his girlfriend. Sienna's smile sharpened. "How fun," she said. "I've heard so much about you." Later, Grant told me she was basically family. Their families vacationed together. Same private schools. Same summers in Europe. Same last names that opened doors. "She's not a thing," he promised when he saw my expression. And I wanted to be the kind of woman who believed him. So I ignored it. I ignored how she happened to be at family gatherings. Ignored how Mrs. Harrington always seated her next to Grant. Ignored the inside jokes, the shared memories, the way his parents looked at them like a painting they'd commissioned years ago. After graduation, Grant and I moved in together. A cozy apartment in the city. Not glamorous, but ours. I worked hard, took extra shifts, side gigs, anything to keep us comfortable. Grant had plans, big ones, but he also had a safety net, and sometimes that made him float where I had to climb. Still, I loved him, and when he asked me to marry him after 4 years, simple ring, private moment, no audience, I said yes. Because I believed that meant we'd finally chosen each other loudly enough for his family to hear. But his family didn't celebrate. They acknowledged it the way you acknowledge a storm warning, something inconvenient you hope passes quickly. A week later, his parents invited us over. They sat us down in the formal living room, the one that looked staged for photographs. "We'd like to help with the wedding," Mrs. Harrington said. "Of course." My chest loosened slightly. "But," she continued, "only if it's done properly." I learned quickly what properly meant. Their estate, their guest list, their vendors, their vision. And yes, their people, including Sienna. "That's non-negotiable," his mother said gently, like she was explaining gravity. "She's family." I glanced at Grant, waiting. He hesitated. "Just a beat," then said, "We can make it work." Wedding planning became an exercise in controlled frustration. Every suggestion I made was met with a pause. A polite redirection. "Oh, that might be difficult. That's not really our style. Traditionally, we do it this way." Every time I pushed back, Grant asked me to be flexible. "It's just one day," he said. "It never is. It's a preview." And the more I tried to name what was happening, the more he used his favorite phrase like a lid on the conversation. "You're overthinking." So I stopped arguing. I focused on doing. I learned which fork to use without asking. I learned not to talk about money casually. I learned to laugh softly when his mother laughed, never louder. It felt like etiquette. In hindsight, it was conditioning. His family dinners became regular events, and every one of them followed the same quiet pattern. His parents would greet me politely, ask me surface-level questions, then shift their attention, inevitably, to her. Sienna. She never did anything overtly cruel. That was the most infuriating part. She didn't insult me. She didn't flirt aggressively. She didn't need to. She belonged. She knew where to stand, when to speak, how to phrase things so they sounded effortless. She talked about shared vacations, mutual friends, private schools she and Grant attended years apart, but somehow together. She fit into the conversations like a puzzle piece that had always been there. And I was extra. At one dinner, Mr. Harrington leaned back in his chair and said, "So, Naomi, where do you see yourself in 5 years?" It wasn't curiosity. It was evaluation. I answered honestly, talked about my career, my plans, my desire to build something stable. He nodded slowly. "And Grant?" he asked, turning to his son. "You'll need someone who can keep up with your trajectory." Keep up, as if love were a race. On the drive home, I asked Grant if he noticed. He sighed, eyes on the road. "You're reading too much into things." So I stopped reading. I invested. When Grant wanted to move into the city, I helped make it happen. When he decided to pivot careers, I adjusted. When he needed time to figure things out, I carried more. When his family paid for his graduate program but couldn't justify contributing to our shared expenses, I filled the gap quietly. I told myself love meant teamwork. What I didn't see was the imbalance forming. I was investing in us. He was investing in himself, with the comfort of knowing his family would always cushion the fall. There was one weekend that should have warned me. Grant was stressed about work. Quiet, distant. So I took extra shifts, saved enough, and surprised him with a short getaway. Just the two of us. Cheap cabin, no signal, just quiet. He broke down when we arrived. Said I was his rock. Said he didn't know how he'd do this without me. Held me like I was essential. I believed him. 2 days later, we returned, and his parents had already scheduled a family dinner. Sienna was there. She asked about our trip with polite interest. Grant talked about it with an ease that made my stomach tighten. His mother smiled and said lightly, "That sounds quaint." That word again. Not a compliment. A label. Like my effort was a novelty. Later that night, Grant mentioned, casually, that Sienna's parents had offered to fund her new venture. Must be nice, I said, not bitter, just observant. He laughed. Yeah, she's lucky. I waited for him to say you are too. He didn't. The comparison started small. Sienna's starting something impressive. My parents really trust her judgment. She understands how things work. I'd sit there, nodding, wondering when I'd become a reference point instead of a partner. I asked him once, carefully, if he still chose me. He looked surprised. Of course I do, he said. Why would you even ask that? Because love shouldn't feel like an audition. But I didn't say that. I swallowed it. Because I wanted to believe that if I was patient enough, steady enough, good enough, eventually I'd stop feeling like a temporary inconvenience in his permanent world. What I didn't know then was this. Grant wasn't torn between me and Sienna. He was torn between effort and ease. And ease had an entire family advocating for it. There's a specific kind of loneliness that only happens when you're with someone. Not alone, not abandoned, just slowly erased. That's what the months leading up to our engagement turned into. Family events became non-negotiable. My needs became flexible. At dinners, his parents perfected the art of exclusion without confrontation. They'd ask Sienna about her work in detail, leaning in, impressed. They'd ask me how work was going in that vague way that signaled the conversation was already over. At the table, seating was never accidental. Grant in the center. Sienna always beside him. Me, wherever there was space. And Grant? Grant didn't notice. Or worse, he noticed and chose not to intervene. One night, driving home, I finally said it. I feel invisible there. He frowned slightly, like I'd interrupted his thoughts. They don't mean it that way, he said. You're just different. Different. Not wrong. Not bad. Just inconvenient. I started censoring myself. Before speaking at dinners, I'd run sentences through my head twice. Before wearing something new, I'd ask myself if it looked appropriate. Before expressing frustration, I'd remind myself not to seem emotional. I was editing myself into something smaller, quieter, more palatable. Grant noticed the change. But instead of concern, he seemed relieved. You've been easier lately, he said once, half smiling. Easier, like love was supposed to be convenient. When Grant proposed, it wasn't flashy. No crowd. No cameras. Just a quiet evening, the two of us, and a small ring he said he'd picked himself. I want a life with you, he told me, not the one my parents planned. Ours. I believed him. For a brief moment, it felt like relief. Like choosing each other out loud would finally draw a line his family couldn't cross. Then we told his parents. The congratulations came, late. Polite. Measured. Careful. His mother hugged me the way you hug a coworker you don't dislike but don't trust. Well, she said, smiling tightly, this is a big step. His father shook Grant's hand and said, marriage is serious business. And that was it. No celebration dinner. No toast. Just silence. A silence that settled in and started rearranging things. The pre-wedding brunch was supposed to be harmless. That's what Grant said when I hesitated. Just family, he said. One last thing before we get back on track. It was held at his parents' place. The same long table, the same porcelain dishes that looked too delicate to touch. Sunlight poured through the windows, warm and deceptive. Everyone was there. His parents, a few relatives, and of course Sienna, seated close enough to lean in when she spoke, close enough to be seen. I sat beside Grant, my hand resting lightly on his arm, reminding myself that I belonged there. Mrs. Harrington stood once the plates were cleared. She lifted her glass with practiced grace. I just want to say, she began, voice smooth, how grateful I am that our family values tradition, that we still believe in finding the right match, someone who understands where they come from and where they're going. The table hummed with polite approval. Compatibility matters, she continued. Life is complicated enough without unnecessary friction. Her eyes flicked barely to Sienna, not long enough to be called out, long enough to be felt. No one looked at me. No one said my name. I raised my glass anyway. After all, this was my engagement brunch, too. On the drive home, I finally said it. That toast, he cut in immediately. She didn't mean anything by it. She looked at Sienna. She was speaking generally, he insisted. She said, right match, Grant. He exhaled sharply. Why do you always assume the worst? Because patterns repeat. Because I wasn't new anymore. Because I was tired of pretending I didn't hear what everyone else heard. That week, the wedding plans stalled completely. Calls went unanswered. Emails delayed. Decisions pushed back. When I asked if something was wrong, Grant said he needed space. I'm just overwhelmed, he said. My family's putting pressure on me. I waited for him to say, but I choose you. He didn't. Instead, he started staying late, coming home distracted, checking his phone more than usual. One night, I asked quietly if he was talking to Sienna. He looked offended. Don't be dramatic. We're just friends. She understands what I'm dealing with. She understands. That sentence sat between us like a verdict. I didn't argue. I was too tired. The night everything ended didn't feel explosive. It felt prepared. I came home from work and noticed it immediately. A suitcase by the couch, half packed. Carefully folded clothes. Shoes lined up by the door. Not rushed. Not emotional. Planned. Grant was sitting on the couch, arms crossed loosely, like he'd been waiting. I set my bag down slowly. What's going on? I asked, even though my chest already knew. He looked up with an expression I didn't recognize. Not guilt. Not fear. Relief. Naomi, he said, voice steady. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I nodded once. So have I. He stood, pacing slightly, rehearsed words falling into place. My family, they've made it clear they'll never fully accept you. I've been fighting them for years, and I'm exhausted. Fighting. That word felt like a lie. This apartment, this life, it's fine, he said, but it's not what I grew up with. Sienna, my family loves Sienna. She fits. She understands how things work. There it was, out loud, clear. They'll never accept you, he continued, and I can't keep choosing you over my entire family. I waited for the part where he looked torn. It never came. So all those dinners, I said quietly. All those reassurances, that meant nothing? He shrugged slightly. I didn't think it would come to this. Did you love me? I asked. He hesitated. Just long enough. I cared about you, he said. But love shouldn't feel this hard. Hard. As if I were the difficulty. So Sienna, I asked. He scoffed. Don't make this dramatic. I didn't cheat. But yeah, we've been talking more. She gets it. She's one of us. One of us. The way he said it told me everything. I nodded slowly. If that's how you feel, I said, voice even, then go. He looked surprised. You're not even going to argue? I met his eyes. I already did, for years. He shook his head, almost annoyed. You're too passive. Sienna would fight for what she wants. After everything I'd endured, he still wanted me to perform. He picked up the suitcase. My mom's helping me move back temporarily, he added. We'll sort out the lease later. I helped him carry the last box to the door, not because I wanted to be kind, but because I wanted it finished. Clean. Final. He blinked, thrown off by my calm. This is for the best, he said, covering his uncertainty with confidence. You'll find someone on your level. On my level. As the door closed behind him, the apartment felt impossibly quiet. The ring sat on the table where I'd taken it off. I stared at it for a long time. After a while, I put it back in its box. Not confused anymore. Just finally understanding what I'd been to them all along. An option. The first night after Grant left, I didn't cry. Not in the dramatic way people expect. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the blank wall where his coat used to hang, listening to the hum of the city outside our window. Cars passed. Somewhere someone laughed. Life kept moving, completely indifferent. The ring lay in its box on the coffee table. I didn't open it. I already knew what it looked like. In the morning, I made one decision that set the tone for everything that followed. I blocked his number. Not in anger. Not for drama. For peace. I unfollowed him everywhere. Muted mutuals. Closed the doors quietly. I didn't announce it. Didn't post anything cryptic. I just removed myself. By noon, I'd called the landlord. The lease was in both our names. Breaking it early wasn't ideal, but I explained the situation calmly and paid the penalty without arguing. Control felt good. I found a smaller apartment across town. Nothing impressive, but it was mine. No portraits of ancestors on the walls. No silent judgments. No need to perform. Work became my anchor. I took the promotion I'd turned down months earlier, the one that required travel, longer hours, and commitment. The one Grant said would change things. It did, just not the way he meant. I packed my schedule so tightly there was no room left for rumination. Meetings, flights, hotels that all looked the same. At night, alone in unfamiliar rooms, the memories would creep in. The dinners where I smiled while being diminished. The weekends I sacrificed. The way I'd apologized for asking to be defended. I started seeing the pattern clearly for the first time. This wasn't sudden. It was slow erosion. Mutual friends reached out awkwardly. Heard about you and Grant? I'm sorry. I responded politely. It's fine. And changed the subject. I didn't badmouth him. Not because he didn't deserve it. Because I didn't need to. I started going to the gym, something I'd always postponed around his schedule. Joined a hiking group on weekends. Met people who didn't ask where I came from, only where I wanted to go. Slowly, the ache shifted. From sharp to dull, from personal to distant. I stopped asking why I wasn't enough and started asking why I'd accepted so little. One night, alone in my new apartment, I found an old photo of us hiking. I was laughing, leaning into him like the future was guaranteed. For a moment, grief pressed hard. Then clarity followed. I hadn't lost him. I'd lost the version of him I thought existed. About a year after the breakup, I bought a small house in the suburbs, a modest place with a yard that needed work and a porch that caught the evening sun just right. It wasn't flashy, but it was earned. I remember standing in the empty living room on move-in day, keys in my hand, and thinking, this would have never been enough for his family. And for the first time, that thought didn't hurt. It felt like confirmation. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard about Grant occasionally. Nothing direct, just fragments. He'd married Sienna quickly. Lavish wedding. Estate. Everything his family had planned. I felt nothing. Then, slowly, the stories changed. The perfect match wasn't so perfect anymore. Apparently, once Grant no longer had to win Sienna, the effort stopped. He quit one job after another. Talked endlessly about ideas without following through. Spent money freely, assuming it would always be replenished. He expected Sienna to manage everything, socially, emotionally, domestically, while he coasted. Family dinners became tense. Arguments replaced toasts. His parents, who once praised him endlessly, began complaining quietly. Sienna looked tired in the photos people showed me. Thinner, taut, drained. The man who'd chosen ease had become work. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't need to. Their reality spoke for itself. About 18 months after the breakup, my phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. I didn't recognize it. So I opened the message. Hey, Naomi, it's Grant. I've been thinking about old times. How are you? No apology. No accountability. Just a door cracked open, hoping I'd step through. I stared at the screen for a few seconds. Felt nothing but mild irritation. Then I closed the message. Didn't respond. I didn't block that new number right away either. I wanted him to sit in the silence the way I once had. A week later, another message. I miss our hikes. Life's been complicated. Maybe coffee sometime? Still nothing. Then came the voicemail. Naomi, please pick up. I know you're there. I made a mistake. I was pressured. Sienna isn't who I thought she was. Can we talk? I really need a friend right now. A friend. After everything. I deleted the voicemail without listening to it twice. Grant didn't stop after the voicemail. Silence had never been his strength. At first, it was subtle, messages spaced just far enough apart to feel accidental. A reaction to an old photo I'd been tagged in. A late night, hope you're doing well. A casual reminder that he still existed. I ignored all of it. Then he escalated. A mutual friend reached out. Hey, Grant asked me to check in on you, Jake said over text. He's really struggling, says he messed everything up. I stared at the message longer than I should have. Not because I was tempted. Because I was irritated by the assumption that I was now part of his recovery plan. I'm not interested, I replied simply. Jake backed off. But the pressure didn't stop. Another friend called a week later. Sarah, someone I'd always been polite to but never close with. Naomi, I know this is awkward, she said, lowering her voice like we were conspiring. But Grant is miserable. Sienna treats him terribly. His parents are furious. He's finally realizing what he lost. What he lost, I repeated. As if I were an object misplaced during a bad decision. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Well, you were good for him. Stable, grounded. He needs that again. Needs. As if my role in his life had always been to absorb chaos and convert it into calm. This isn't my problem, I said evenly. Please don't call me about this again. The final attempt came when Grant showed up in person. At my office. Unannounced. I was heading out for lunch when I saw him in the lobby. He looked smaller. Not physically, but energetically. Wrinkled shirt, dark circles under his eyes. The confidence he once wore like a tailored jacket now hung loose. Naomi, he said, stepping toward me. Please, just 5 minutes. I stopped a few feet away. Why are you here? I asked. His voice cracked, just slightly. I screwed up, he said. I thought choosing my family would make things easier. But Sienna, she's not who I thought. She expects everything. My parents fight with her constantly. They hate how entitled she's become. Entitled. The word landed with bitter irony. You were good to me, he continued. Reliable. I see that now. We can fix this. I'll stand up to them, I swear. Now, when it cost him something, I looked at him, not with anger, not with sadness, with clarity. You chose this, I said. You told me she fit, that I didn't. His jaw tightened. Don't throw that in my face, he snapped. I was pressured. I was confused. You were comfortable, I corrected. His expression shifted, frustration bleeding into resentment. You're being cruel, he said. After everything we had, you can just walk away? I already did, I replied. I stepped around him. Naomi. This conversation is over. I walked past him without looking back. Later that night, the text turned ugly. You've changed. You're heartless. You'll regret this. No one else will put up with your boring, rigid life. Charm. Pleading. Anger. I blocked the number and thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong, because Grant wasn't done. And neither was his family. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Something in me already knew who it was. Naomi, dear, the voice said, syrupy and strained. It's Mrs. Harrington. I closed my eyes for a brief second. Of course it was. It's been far too long, she continued, as if we'd simply drifted apart naturally. I've been meaning to reach out. Why are you calling me? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She sighed theatrically. Things haven't gone as planned, she said. Grant is very unhappy. Sienna has been difficult, demanding. She doesn't respect boundaries, and frankly, she paused, waiting for sympathy. I didn't give it. We never should have interfered, she added quickly. You were so steady, so supportive. We miss the way you treated Grant. The way I treated him. Not who I was. Not how I felt. My value once again reduced to utility. I'm sorry you're unhappy with your daughter-in-law, I said calmly, but this has nothing to do with me. There was a beat of silence. Well, she said carefully, we thought perhaps you could come to dinner. Talk some sense into Grant. Help him see what he's throwing away. Talk sense into him. As if I were a consultant hired to clean up their mistake. No, I said. The word landed solid and complete. She sounded taken aback. Naomi, let's be reasonable. You know the family. You know how things work. I do, I replied. That's why I'm saying no. Her tone sharpened. You're being unfair. We're trying to fix this. You're trying to reverse it, I corrected. There's a difference. She inhaled sharply. Grant loved you, she said. And you loved him. Surely that counts for something. It did, I said, back then. And now? Now it's over. She tried one last angle. You were always family material, she said softly, unlike certain people. Family material. The phrase nearly made me laugh. I'm not interested in being reconsidered, I said. Please don't call me again. I hung up before she could respond. I blocked the number. A few weeks later, I was hosting a small housewarming party. Nothing extravagant. Just friends from work, my hiking group, a few people who'd become part of my life in the quiet rebuilding years. Laughter filled the living room. Music played softly. Someone had brought a ridiculous plant as a gift. I felt content. Midway through the night, my phone buzzed. Another unknown number. Against my better judgment, I stepped outside to answer. Naomi, Mrs. Harrington said, her voice more frantic this time. Please listen. Grant's gotten worse. He refuses to work. He spends money constantly. We fight every day. Sienna, she's draining us dry. I leaned against the railing, listening to the laughter inside my house. My life. Whole. Peaceful. Uncomplicated. I'm sorry you're unhappy with the daughter-in-law you chose, I said evenly. But this has nothing to do with me. Please, she pleaded. You were good for him. How can we fix this? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I simply said the truth. You can't. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. But Naomi... Goodbye. I ended the call, blocked the number, and went back inside. The music resumed. Someone handed me a drink. And for the first time, the past didn't even try to follow me. After that night, the noise finally stopped. No more unknown numbers. No more friends checking in. No more carefully worded messages disguised as concern. Grant disappeared from my life the way he'd disappeared in it. Quietly, when there was nothing left to take. And what surprised me most wasn't relief. It was indifference. Weeks passed. Then months. I didn't wonder how he was doing. Didn't imagine what might have been. Didn't feel curious about whether he regretted it all. Because regret, I learned, only matters when it comes from the right place. And his never did. The last I heard of Grant came secondhand, the way all irrelevant news does. Apparently, the marriage limped on in name only. He and Sienna fought constantly. His parents had stopped covering expenses. The family dinners he once chose over me became battlegrounds. The same people who told him I wasn't a fit now whispered about how he'd ruined his life. The irony was almost poetic. But I didn't feel vindicated. I felt finished. One quiet evening, months later, I found myself sitting on the porch of my house as the sun dipped low, casting everything in that soft, forgiving light that makes even ordinary things feel intentional. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who tried harder, who waited patiently, who believed love was something you proved by enduring disrespect. I wished I could tell her one thing. You don't win by being chosen late. You don't win by being reconsidered after the preferred option fails. You don't win by being good enough once someone else becomes inconvenient. What I lost wasn't a man. It was an illusion. And losing it gave me something far better: clarity. I built a life where no one evaluates my worth at a dinner table, where love doesn't come with conditions, where I'm not compared, measured, or quietly tolerated. And if you're listening to this thinking you recognize yourself, if you've ever been told to be patient while being diminished, if you've ever been asked to shrink so someone else could feel comfortable, if you've ever felt like love required permission from people who never planned to give it, let me say this clearly. Never audition for a place someone else decided you didn't belong, because the right life doesn't need you to prove yourself. It just opens the door. Thanks for listening. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe. It helps these stories reach people who need to hear them. And if you've lived something similar, share it in the comments. Sometimes the quietest endings carry the strongest lessons.